Last week, City of Santa Monica approves, wait till you hear this, $123 million for a 122 unit affordable housing and homeless project. And oh, by the way, just 4 blocks from the beach. Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Report. I'm your host, Chris Berg. The mission of our show here is to empower you to build generational wealth with real estate. Very special guest joining us today. He's with the Sinai Law Firm, Avi Sinai. Avi, it's great to have you with us. I did not tell you this before we started because I just want to get your reaction. I want to set the table here and I'll share with you. So last week, Avi puts out this tweet. On Tuesday, City of Santa Monica approves a 122-unit affordable housing development, homeless supportive housing, and you can do the math here, over $1 million per unit. And as I just mentioned, oh yeah, by the way, just 4 blocks from the beach. So Avi, believe it or not, a buddy of mine from North Dakota texted me your tweet unannounced that you and I are going to be doing this together. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to be on my podcast next week. So your tweet got some legs. Again, thank you for joining us. What is happening here?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure. And as I was telling you before we started, I think that what we're having is, we have policy decisions and policymakers who have underlying set of beliefs that on the surface are super reasonable, right? And I think that if you just present them on a blank slate to voters or residents, even sound reasonable, right? The problem is that because of the, voter makeout or, certain political affiliations in the city council, these beliefs on a vacuum lead us to absolutely disastrous results like we see here in Santa Monica, right? There is this idea that, this small city of 90,000 residents can somehow solve the housing crisis, right? We're a beachfront property, one of the most, valuable land on the planet, not just in California, right? And it, because of the policies that city council enacted, the state, the residents, right? Everyone shares equal blame. It attracts a lot of homeless population, right? And there's infinite demand, right? At certain price points, there's going to be infinite demand for housing here because everyone wants to come here. So that's how we got to the point where city council approved a 122 unit housing project at $1 million cost per unit. It was initially slated to be a much larger project for $200 million, but they opted for a smaller project. It used to be a parking garage that everyone used to come to downtown. That was demolished, and now they're building a homeless shelter and affordable housing project.
They wanted to shrink the price because they were being such good stewards of, I'm presuming that was what, 90% taxpayer money? I mean, where is this money coming from? This $123 million?
There was, in my initial tweet below, there was a breakdown of how that money is going to be raised. Some of them, so this project is going to be operated and managed by a certain nonprofit, I believe, that their business is affordable housing and, homeless housing. Some of it is equity, but the majority of it comes from zero interest construction loans provided by the taxpayers, some city grants, some state grants, and some federal grants. So it's heavily subsidized by the taxpayers, federal and state.
Yeah, I'm going to bring this up for our audience just to give them an idea and a breakdown, because I do have this. I had a chance to take a look at a little bit of the Santa Monica City Council meeting. You can see some of the data here. I think one other important thing to note that I want to have you speak to, Avi, is that we'll get to your other X article that you put out, but the fact that there's immediate housing in Santa Monica now, and yet this project's not going to get done until I think they said they're not going to start having people move in until like 2029, 2030, correct?
Yep.
Does that make any sense?
No. And that's, again, I don't have any issue, if we had clear policy goals, right? If we had defined clear policy goals that our leaders would believe would solve the problem, I'd say, hey, you know what? Let's invest the money. Let's do it. But we don't, right? If you ask the city council members who supported it, and I actually did on Twitter weeks ago, what do you think a house should cost in Santa Monica? What do you think rent should be? Do you have a price goal, right? Another, one thing I didn't mention here is in a 2-block radius from this project. And again, this is a city with 90,000 residents, that mostly low-rise apartments, right? 2 stories maximum. There are about 3,000 units added just in a 2-block radius. Gigantic projects, right? There are no price targets with the city council. I don't know what they're shooting for, right? They're just approving mass high-rise projects. We don't know what the demand is, right? They just want to say, hey, if we increase supply, prices will drop. To what price? We don't know, right? So will this project solve the problem? What happens if 4,000 more homeless people come to the city? Are we going to build more projects like that, right? There's no end. There's no clear policy goals. This is just, to me, right? It seems like an empty political act hidden under the guise of a state law that requires us to build more housing.
There's a lot to chew on here, so I want to touch on that piece. That I do want to get into, as you talked about, hey, there's real no accountability. And I think the big question I always ask people is, so what are we solving for, right? And you look back at what happened with the state of California spent, I think, $24 billion over 5 years for homelessness. The problem actually got worse. So we'll get back to that in a minute. But let's talk to for a moment here where you're saying, hey, Chris, part of the problem or the challenge may be is the fact that there's a state mandate where they've got to meet certain housing requirements, because I think you mentioned in your X article about, hey, why don't they just go out and buy existing housing? I mean, if it's really about housing people, let's just go buy the existing housing and problem solved, right?
Yeah, but again, what you'll hear from housing advocates and the city council, they said, well, wait a minute, we are required by the state by a certain time to build more units because that's a state requirement. Otherwise, we lose our zoning power and permit power by the builder's remedy, right? And on paper, right, they'll be right. But I don't know how that justifies a project like this, right? There are other parts in the city that are much cheaper. We have a huge plot of land, the airport, just down the street, right? Huge plot of land owned by the city that we can have much more density in. We can provide much more housing. We can house much more people. But for whatever reason, this plot was chosen. And this is just one project. The city, a couple months ago, decided to allocate, I believe, 3 other parking lots in existing neighborhoods for homeless and affordable housing, maybe a mile away. And the existing residents are not happy about it, right? I mean, you move into a neighborhood, you pay certain rent, and then all of a sudden the city decides that right next to you is going to be a monstrous, huge building with homeless housing. And every person that you speak to in a neighborhood had some negative interaction or assault or threats and crime from the homeless community. The city has just been absolutely overrun. Our city parks, we have needle distribution in Reed Park. The city crime is through the roof. Doesn't matter what the statistics say, it's just not true. And I understand that we need to give these people housing. I understand that people need help. I understand the rent is expensive, but people are just absolutely fed up.
Well, there's a couple of things too to talk about as we talk about $1 million per unit for homeless housing. It's only going to serve as a magnet. There was a great piece I put out yesterday from Wall Street Week in regards to San Francisco's doom loop, because what's going to happen now when you start to build properties like this, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, we're actually going to start to lower the value of other properties in that surrounding area, correct? Thus lower the property taxes, thus lower the city budget. Fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I certainly think so, right? I mean, I think that if you're a stakeholder and you buy into, just as a real estate person, you buy real estate, you don't want the value to go down. I think it's a super reasonable expectation, right? I don't think that the city or the county should actively try to lower your property value. And it seems like some people now believe that, right? But even if that assumption is too speculative, right? And I lived in San Francisco as well. Again, without clear policy goals, right? If there was a policy goal saying, hey, you know what, our goal is to lower the median housing in our city 15%, I'd say, hey, you know what, I'm against it, but if people are voting for it, I understand it. You want to increase supply, fine. But we don't have that. We don't have clear policy goals. I don't know what the goal is.
Well, and I think, again, you keep bringing that up, so I just want to speak to that in a moment in regards to what happened with the state of California. But I just want to give, for people that aren't familiar with California like you are, to give people an idea of what we're talking about here, is that the red marker here is the actual site that we're talking about, that the city is now going to develop and put, again, $123 million into 122 units, 50 of those to house homeless people. And to give you some context, if you've ever thought about, gosh, wouldn't it be great to live by the beach? This is how close this property. I mean, you literally can be able to wake up, walk down to your local coffee shop, go hit the beach for the day, and just enjoy a beautiful day. I mean, I know I'm from the Midwest. I mean, so many people from the Midwest, Avi, would give anything to be like, man, $4
Yeah.
from the beach, I'm in.
Yeah.
So my point is, my concern is, I think this is only going to create a magnet for more and more homeless people to come to Santa Monica. And then what?
Absolutely. And, I think a great example here is a city that's kind of comparable in scope and size, just right next door, Beverly Hills, right? Beverly Hills has about 40,000 residents. It's its own independent city with its own city council, with its own police force, right? Their homeless problem is much less severe, right? They don't have a severe homeless problem as we have, because they make different policy decisions, right? They have a much bigger police force than we do, even though it's a smaller city. It's much more well-funded per police officer. And because of our policy, what brings the homeless here to Santa Monica is not the housing or the potential to get housing. It's actually very hard to get those affordable units, right? Almost every new construction here in Santa Monica has some element of affordable housing, because people want more density and they get these density bonuses. There is a huge wait list to get those units. It's impossible, right? They're subject to income restriction. It's complicated. It's based on a lottery system, if I understand it correctly. So I don't think it's the housing that brings the homeless in. It's all the services. It's the needle distribution. It's the harm reduction. It's the food. It's all these NGOs that come and work and look, they're also left alone, right? They're just, the city and the police just let them operate, right?
Well, and again, I go back to the value of real estate from a standpoint. Like, I was recently at a Real Deal event in LA, and I think what was so prominent, Avi, within the conversation was the conversation about how great the services are in Beverly Hills, thus the safety. And anybody you talk to in real estate is going to say, look, the most important thing when it comes to value in real estate is going to be safety and security. And so what I'm hearing you say is what's happening in Santa Monica right now is they're diminishing the value of safety and security. So again, it's just going to create this really vicious cycle, in my opinion, of what's going to happen to the value, as you mentioned earlier, to some of the best real estate on the planet. Fair assessment?
Absolutely. And I think that if you look at, from this project, this 4th Street project is 1 block away from the Promenade, right? The Promenade is supposed to be the crown jewel of Santa Monica, the crown jewel of LA, right? It's a closed off street, only walkway. 10 years ago had the best retailers. It was a complete tourist attraction. If you walk on it today, it's depressing. It's full of homeless people. It has over 30% vacancy. Doesn't have all the amenities it used to have. Doesn't used to have the attraction. I remember when we, for a family project, we hired an assessor that specialized in leasing those 3rd Street properties. At the time, rents were $15, $20 a foot per month. Those lease rates are down significantly. right? Sometimes 60, 70%. Property values have plummeted. And city revenue is down as a result as well. And this is not just on 3rd Street, on Main Street, on Wilshire, on Santa Monica. It's vacant store after vacant store after vacant store.
Yes.
And of course, it's impossible to open a business. It takes 1 year to get permits.
So I want to jump into this a little bit more. So first off, Sally, if you have any comments, please share them. We're happy to put them up on screen. But Sally says, hey, so $1 million for one person each. They are stealing, saying they're helping. Now, there's a big conversation about I'm sure you're familiar with the military industrial complex. When people hear that California spent $24 billion and then the state auditor's like, we have no way to know if we made any difference or not with the $24 billion.
Yeah.
Many people are now considering it the homeless industrial complex. Getting to my question, $123 million for 122 units. They always say follow the money. Where's this money going? Who's making it?
I don't have enough information to tell you, if anyone is profiting here. I don't think there's any funny business. I don't think there's any conspiracy. I don't think that there is like some kind of hidden agenda for a certain group or interest group to make money, right? I think that a much more reasonable explanation here is that we have bad policy decisions made by grossly negligent leaders that, in the name of an underlining political ideology, making just bad decisions. I don't think it's more complicated than that.
Sally goes on to say they won't earn $1 million in a lifetime. So there is some funny business going on here. I mean, EAH is the homeless group that's going to be building it and managing it. Again, I think they're above board. They've done a bunch of projects. I don't know. I've never looked in their books. Deborah says for homeless or illegal. So 50 of the 122 units of it are going to be for homeless people. I do want to play a clip for you from the city council meeting. And then I do want to give you a chance to speak to an analogy where you mentioned there's a bunch of units for sale in Santa Monica. So this was at the recent, I think it was last Tuesday, believe it or not, Santa Monica City Council meeting. This is one of the city council people sharing her thoughts. I'm going to share that with us now.
Have that ability to do so. And so I think for me, the most important thing is to move forward, because to me, the most important thing is to get roofs over people's heads. We talk about units, and I hate that term. We're building homes. These are homes for people, many of whom currently don't have a home, many of whom are crammed into overcrowded situations, which is why we're emphasizing 2 and 3 bedrooms. Many of whom have 2 hours to drive to get to their jobs here in Santa Monica.
I mean, I have a lot to say here. And she says the most important thing is getting roofs over people's heads, but that's not really accurate. Let me put it that way. Fair?
Yeah.
Because you said just recently there was how many units that sold for how much?
Yeah, I mean, just today on X, popular account that shows recent closings, 2 miles away from this project, same price, actually with a little bit of change, $120 million in Santa Monica, 399 units. So 400 units. The city could have bought 400 units, have $3 million to spare, and house 400 people. And they could have done it today, not in 2029 when this project is supposed to finish. It'll probably take longer. And it'll probably cost a lot more money, right? So even if we're taking the underlying assumptions of the city council, that they want to help people, that they want to house people, they don't want to bring working families here, right? Or they want to have working families own or rent homes at reasonable prices, right? Why not maximize the resources we have to house as many people as possible, right? That sale just was advertised today. There are many other sales. Again, I checked sales close to the ocean. So if you're like 5 blocks from the ocean, the average sale price in the last 2-3 years is maybe $600,000 a unit. So if the city wanted to house people next to the ocean, they could have bought existing housing stock at $600,000, $500,000 a unit. And if they offered people to buy buildings at 500, a lot of property owners will come forward and sell it.
So I've just been back in California now for 18 months. Came back from the Midwest. two things. One, is there a way for the people of Santa Monica to stop this project, or is it a done deal? And secondly, why do the people of California continue to say, "Oh, okay, 123 million for 122 units? All right."
Yeah, I don't know if there's a way to stop the project. I have no idea, to be honest with you. I think that the question for California and specifically Santa Monica too, look, we have an election now, right? And I think that there's definitely a lot more awareness. There's a lot more civil engagement, I feel like. I think we have some promising candidates that, they're not perfect, but I think we'll do better than the candidates we have right now, the existing members in the city council. And I hope they win. Look, you mentioned California. We have Prop 33 coming, which is the big elephant in the room, repealing Costa-Hawkins, which will enable local municipalities to enact rent control on condominiums and single-family homes, vacancy control. I put out a tweet about a month ago on.
Oh, Avi, we just lost you. Hopefully he's coming back. But so Avi was just talking about Prop 33. We'll give him a moment to, maybe he got a phone call, but I want to share this with you as we bring Avi back in. So recently we had the president of the California Business Roundtable join us. They are on the board of the Public Policy Institute of California. And so they did some recent polling in early September. California Prop 33, and again, in regards to rent control, we'll have Avi speak to this more. He's a real estate attorney, does a lot with evictions, but their polling showed.
Can you hear me?
We got you now, Avi. So 1 second, 51% yes to Prop 33, 46% no. And Avi, if you can see this is some recent polling. We lost Avi. So hopefully Avi will jump back in here in a moment. But this is something definitely to be aware of. Okay, Avi, can you hear me?
Yes, I think the power went out in my office, so I apologize. You'll have to excuse me.
It was one of those California brownouts. The grid is too
ridiculous. Yeah. So as I was saying about Prop 33, right? I put out a tweet about a month ago of how complicated it is to vote the proper way and how to convince voters against, to vote against Prop 33. So the proponents of Prop 33, it's a very simple explanation to voters. Hey, we got this, rent is too high, vote yes on Prop 33. That's going to help local governments keep the rent low. That's a very easy sell to voters. It is so complicated to explain to someone why you should vote against Prop 33. Very, very complicated, right? And I think the other element is that, in LA and California, a lot of young people, young families are just completely priced out of being able to afford a home. There's no pathway to homeownership anymore. So if you're going to be a renter forever, it makes sense to vote in line with that future to get as much protection as possible. So I'm guessing it's probably going to get a little bit worse before it gets better.
Quick, just to play devil's advocate on Prop 33. I'm a big proponent of local government being the best government, right? It's the closest to the people. This does not mandate local governments put in rent controls. It just gives them the option. So
that's right.
I vote yes for Prop 33 and let the locals do what they're going to do.
I think it's a great example of what Los Angeles did in early 2023 with the Just Cause ordinance. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It essentially enacted rent control without the restriction of raising rent, but it gave all the other protections to essentially every residential unit in LA that's not covered under rent control. So if you have a house in Pacific Palisades or Brentwood that's worth $30 million, or you're renting it out to someone, the lease expiring is no longer grounds to terminate the lease. They can just stay there, right? You can raise the rent to whatever you want with the proper notice, but now we can only terminate residencies, any type of residency, for cause. It created chaos, right? People don't want to rent their homes anymore. People don't want to rent their condominiums. So
wait, I'm not familiar with this. Can you back up? So even though the lease is over, you still have a right to live there. All I can do though is
Absolutely. That's what this is what the Just Cause ordinance says. It started in 2023. Doesn't matter if it's a brand new unit. Doesn't matter if it's a $35 million mansion. Doesn't matter if it's a condominium. Doesn't matter if it's your own home. Doesn't matter, right? So rent control is rent control. This covers everything else. And you want to sell the property, that's not proper reason to terminate the lease. If you raise the rent and the tenant cannot afford it, you have to pay relocation fees. If you want to move in, you have to pay relocation fees. If you want to demolish the unit, you have to pay relocation fees. So it's a very, very restrictive law that I think the majority of property owners, agents, even lawyers are unaware of. And I think, that law and that legal framework had good intentions. But look at where it got us. Today, I think it shrunk the available housing stock in LA. I think it's a net negative, in my opinion. I have clients who have single family homes that had to pay $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 buyouts to tenants because they wanted their property back. That never existed before. So I don't know if it's a good idea to give municipalities more power to enact rent control, but I tell this to my friends and colleagues all the time. Maybe we haven't hit the rock bottom yet before things have to change. So maybe that needs to happen.
Well, I think, Avi, my concern is if this plays out how I'm seeing it, is, capital flows like water, right? When people hear this kind of anecdotal story about, hey, just to get back in my house, I got to pay somebody 30 grand. Capital is not going to come to this state. So less capital comes here. Now we're devaluing the properties based on some of the antics that are happening in Santa Monica. You've got less money coming into the coffers for the city to actually fund police. And it's going to turn into this vicious circle unless someone steps in and says, hey, enough is enough. And I think if you get the time, I did post some snippets recently, but there's a great piece on Wall Street Weekend. You live in San Francisco, you mentioned?
Yeah, I lived there for 3 years for school.
Okay. But you're down here in SoCal now. But
yeah.
Piece about the doom loop and how the business community is starting to come together in San Francisco and say, hey, enough's enough. We got to turn the city back around and get things back on track. So if you want to comment on that, great. But I'll give you a chance to do that. But I've got just 2 more questions for you. So any thoughts on San Francisco and the doom loop, or you want to move on?
San Francisco is a dear place to my heart. I live there. I visit all the time. I think the doom loop started probably in the early 2000s. I was there. I moved to the Bay Area in 2006. The doom loop started back then. So it's not anything new. We had crime back then. We had vacancies. There were just a lot of great things about the city that just don't exist anymore. So the bad things are more prominent. And I think that, in my opinion, if San Francisco is the bellwether, I think the change politically is going to come because people want to eliminate, to stop the crime wave.
Yes.
And I hope that this will happen here in San Francisco.
Speaking of that,
in SoCal,
Prop 36 maybe able to help with that. This is about stronger laws for people that are stealing and drugs. And I've got a great quote from the mayor of San Jose, just talking about the homelessness, and the number one killer of Californians right now, 18 to 45, is overdoses. So just hopefully a lot to change there. This is the question I want to get to for you. $24 billion spent in 5 years to eradicate homelessness in California, at least help change the trajectory. It actually got worse. Clearly, just throwing money at the problem is not the solution. So if you were king for the day, for a year, however long, what would you do to solve this housing crisis in California?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask, because my personal opinion, I don't think there's any housing crisis in California, right? And I know it sounds controversial. Here's the way I look at it, right? My first car was a 1988 Toyota Camry, right? It was great. My car now is a lot nicer, right? My car now can stop automatically. It has a ton more airbags. It can drive itself. It's a great car, right? It's a better car in every way. Just like Southern California is a great place to live. The air is clean. We got beautiful nature, but there is a cost to it, right? And at a certain price point, everybody can afford it. Anyone would want to live here, right? So if we overbuilt and we oversupply the market, and prices crash, right? And we destroy property values. And now you can buy a home here at what it would cost in Austin, Texas. Everyone would just move here. I think if I was king for a day, I would start having hard conversations about what does a housing crisis actually mean? What does affordability actually mean? And how we can use our limited resources to give people opportunities to live where they can afford, right? Just because you grew up somewhere, in my opinion, right, doesn't give you the right to live there at whatever salary you're making, right? I think that we've tried, and what you said about the homeless funding, right, $24 billion. We've tried a top-down approach from the government that's clearly not working. Our elected official cannot be trusted with any money that the taxpayer give them, right? We have to try something else. So I definitely, I would try a bottom-up approach, much more long-term thing, but thank God I'm not king for a day. Yeah.
Obviously, I want to be respectful of your time. We said, hey, 20, 30 minutes. We're now at 31. So I just want to say thank you. I hope you will do this again. I think this was a great conversation.
It was great.
Thank you.
Obviously, a lot more to talk about, but I appreciate you having me on, and it was a pleasure.
Yeah, let's kind of have you back as a regular. If people want to reach out to you, they want to maybe
100%.
hire you, how do they go about doing that? Going to SinaiLawFirm.com, or
they can go to SinaiLawFirm.com. Yeah, absolutely. With questions, you can always reach out to me. I help property owners and residential and commercial, mostly litigation. Yes.
Anything else you want to add or share that I haven't asked you, sir?
No, it was a pleasure having me. Thank you so much, Chris.
It was great having you. Great conversation. Really appreciate your insight. If you want to follow Avi on Twitter, obviously putting out some good tweets as well, so you can do that at the Law Firm. This is the Commercial Real Estate Report, empowering you to build generational wealth with real estate.